Hey everybody, what's up? Just Ehren here, Question Period Canada. Thank God it's Friday. WTF, what is going on in Canadian federal politics? We're going to jump right in. They're doing their statements before question period starts. There's probably 7 minutes before we get going. So we're going to jump right in, see what's going on. Here we go.
The minister stated, and I quote, "Our
How's
government
everybody
has
doing
made the
today?
decision to stop investing in
Things
new
are
road
okay in Nova Scotia.
infrastructure,"
It's
end quote.
lightly snowing.
Rural Canadians don't have the option to take a subway to work or to the doctor's office. They rely on highways and roads. But this NDP Liberal government doesn't care about rural Canadians. That's why this Prime Minister is increasing his failed carbon tax by 23% on April 1st. It's clear he is not worth the cost. Rural Canadians can't afford this government's plan to quadruple the carbon tax. Only Conservatives will fight for rural Canadians and axe the carbon tax.
The honourable member for Mississauga, Ehren Mills.
Madam Speaker, I encourage all members in this House to get with the program. That's the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program, a collaboration between local community organizations and the Canada Revenue Agency to deliver free tax clinics for Canadians. This collaboration between the CRA and dedicated volunteers across Canada allows us to give back to communities by helping residents to file their taxes. Local organizations across the country run these tax clinics for lower-income Canadians to help make sure that they are getting their benefits, like the Canada Child Benefit, the Canada Workers Benefit, Canada Carbon Rebate, and many more cost-of-living measures that they may be eligible for. I am so proud of the positive impact that we have made through the CVITP and look forward to repeating this success again in what will be a productive tax filing season this year. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, it's never been more expensive to feed your family,
Good evening,
own a
Boo Boo.
home,
What's up?
and heat your house. The price of everything is up, and the average family of 4 will spend an additional $700 this year on groceries compared to last. And now the Prime Minister is hiking the carbon tax by 23% on April 1st. But he's not done there. He's also jacking up the tax on beer, wine, and spirits by 5% for good measure. Now, I don't know if this Prime Minister learned basic reasoning, so let me explain. If you tax the farmer that grows the food, the trucker who ships the food, you tax all who buy the food. So, what's the result? 2 million Canadians now rely on a food bank, and 50% are $200 away from insolvency. Yet the Liberals think rebranding the carbon tax will stop the financial pain. Newsflash,
Hey,
it
Dive
won't.
Crew, what's up?
Canadians live in reality.
Flips.
They know the carbon tax is a tax plan, not an environment plan. Only common sense Conservatives will axe the tax on everything, for everyone, and for good. Here, here. Well done.
Honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, the lives of renters, mortgage holders, and the unhoused continue to worsen with crushing costs. The facts speak for themselves. Home prices now outpace incomes by 40%, earning Canada the worst record in the G7. While American rents fall, Canadian rents hit record highs. Canada built fewer homes in 2022 than in 1972, and housing starts were down in 2023. We now have the fewest homes per capita of any country in the G7, despite having the most land to build on. Ottawa-funded gatekeepers and punitive taxes add hundreds of thousands of dollars of unneeded costs to the construction of each home. Canada's infrastructure funding should be tied to actually building homes. On top of this, we now hear the radical environment minister doesn't even want to build new roads. Our common sense Conservative plan will ensure
Coney, what's
infrastructure
up?
dollars go to the municipalities that get their bureaucracies out of the way to build homes, not bureaucracy.
The honourable member for Argenteuil-La Petite Nation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Do you guys
As
think
you know,
Poilievre's going to be in the House?
In this House, you know how passionate I am by music and singing.
He'll pick them
and it's
apart
a
on
great
this
pleasure
Friday,
that I learned
like,
that a young firefighter
Trudeau's
from
not gonna
La
be
Chute
there.
in my riding,
Probably
Gabrielle
Freeland won't be there.
Fredette, is one of
I
the
found
young
this week
talents
they've been
selected to take part
sending
in The
their
Voice Quebec.
deadbeats up to bat.
In fact,
like
he had
trying
the
to put
honor
out the fire because there are certain politicians, even though you don't like them, you like watching them. Like, I enjoy disliking Chrystia Freeland. It's a weird thing, but I don't like her, but I enjoy watching her so I can dislike it more. It's a weird thing. Like, And I found this week they've been sending up like LeBlanc a lot, Duclos a lot, I have trouble saying his name, Fragusqueros, sending these deadbeats up. And I think it's a strategy.
For Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today during Sexual and Reproductive Health Awareness Week to emphasize the importance of menstrual equity, access to contraception and abortion rights for Canadian women and gender-diverse people. I'm happy to see my colleagues join me in celebrating the critical gains made by Canada's feminist movement in its fight for women's sexual and reproductive rights. But we cannot forget that there is still work to be done. It has now been over 2 weeks since Fredericton's only abortion clinic closed, and this government has done nothing. The Liberals pat themselves on the back for supporting gender equality, but refuse to ensure access to safe abortion, while the Conservatives are actively undermining this right through backdoor legislation. The human right to a safe, trauma-informed abortion care is only as good as the ability to access that right. Leaders must uphold the Canada Health Act and ensure access is available to everyone in Canada. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Madam Speaker, February 22nd is recognized as National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. This date shouldn't be just a box on the calendar, but rather a call to action against all forms of human trafficking, which is defined as a modern form of human slavery, usually for sexual purposes or forced labor or slavery. Victims often suffer physical, sexual, financial, emotional, and psychological abuse and are often forced to work and live in horrific conditions. Human trafficking, because of the damage and violence it inflicts, is linked to severe trauma, and recovery from its repercussions can last a lifetime.
I'd say question period's going to kick off in a couple of minutes. If we can get some likes going, it does help with
97% are women and children. Many of them are Indigenous. There are still too many victims. This National Day of Awareness must give us the means to better identify these heinous crimes, to denounce them vehemently, and to fight them more effectively. Let's take action.
The Honourable Member Langley Aldergrove.
Where's the accountability? Where's the funds? What a boondoggle. In a misguided attempt, this Liberal government tried to control our borders during the pandemic, and they wasted at least $60 million on an app that should have cost no more than $80,000, and it doesn't even work. Without competition, they handed out a contract for $20 million to a couple of guys operating out of their basement, and then they decided, hey, let's throw in another $40 million for good measure. Oh, and some nice bottles of scotch and a couple of fancy dinners for our friends. Madam Speaker, this government wasted $60 million taxpayer dollars.
So much money.
People who did no work on an app that does not work. That's Liberal accounting. That's the Arrive Can scam. Time to call in the RCMP.
We'll have to wait and see how Pierre does, right? Cooney?
Speaker,
we'll
in
wait and see.
2010, I was working in Africa
when
one of my colleagues turned to me and said, "You Canadian women are hypocrites." I was stunned. She went on to say that she had studied at McGill. She knew Canadian women had reproductive rights, but it wasn't good enough for African women. I was mortified, Madam Speaker, and I decided right then that I was going to run for office and change that policy. Not always in this place do we get to come full circle, but 3 weeks ago I was in Kinshasa, where I toured a safe abortion clinic funded by Canada. DRC has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world, 10% because of unsafe abortion. And Madam Speaker, our commitment to sexual and reproductive health and rights is not ideology. It literally saves lives. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Well done. The Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Dive Crew. That's not necessary, but thank you very much.
This Black
Appreciate
History Month, I would like to recognize an Ottawa-based organization, ACRI, Mothers and Daughters Literacy. Its mission is to create lasting,
Danielle, what's
positive, community-based change
Hey Don,
to
what's
basic
up?
literacy in
Hi,
rural
Joan.
and underprivileged communities in Somaliland. It empowers girls and women with the power to learn, to be heard, to be seen, and to make a difference. I agree with them that educated, empowered women can change the world.
What's up?
Successful economic development of a community or a country can be fast-tracked if education is made available to all and specifically if girls are educated. I would like to recognize and thank the team under the leadership of Anab Mohammed for their noble and dedicated service to realize our GRITS mission. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Oral questions.
Here we go.
The
Who's up
honourable member
first?
for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands,
Okay,
and
we've
Lakes.
Mike Barrett's up
Years of
first.
this NDP Liberal government, their Arrive scam app that was supposed to cost $80,000 cost Canadians $60 million. And just like this,
Hey, Brent,
NDP
what's
Liberal
up?
Prime Minister is not worth the cost or the corruption. GC Strategies, the two-person team who was working out of their basement, got paid $20 million and did no IT work, but they did take senior Liberal officials out for whiskey tastings and fine dinners. Not worth the cost and not worth the corruption. So will this NDP Liberal Prime Minister join common sense Conservatives as we call for the RCMP to expand the investigation into this Liberal scandal?
L'honorable ministre des Services publics et de l'approvisionnement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Very pleased to answer this question, which we have heard before and to which we have provided appropriate answers already. Pleased to remind everyone that the Auditor General had not only the job, but the very important job of tabling a report on Monday, which we are looked at and obviously already troubled about the findings that there are in that report. And we have taken into account all the recommendations that are in the report, and many of them have been put into place already for some time.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Speaker, the minister says the auditor had an important job, but that minister and all of these Liberals voted against the auditor conducting the audit. It was because of the leader of the opposition moving a motion in November of 2022 that we had that Auditor General investigation. And just like that was the right thing to do then, calling in the RCMP is the right thing to do now. This is an $80,000 app that ballooned to $60 million. We have a two-person firm working out of their basement being paid $20 million and whining and dining senior Liberal officials. Will these Liberals end the cover-up and join Conservatives in calling for an expanded RCMP investigation?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the member is completely right in pointing to the important work of the Auditor General. She did work very hard over the last few months, and that's what we expected of her and her office. She tabled an important report on Monday. As she has said repeatedly, she's also completely willing and able to work with all other partners and institutions across the government, including with the RCMP, with which she is already in touch.
I don't want to interrupt the show at all, but my goodness gracious, Dive Canada, thank you.
To do her work, but the problem is this government refuses
Super
to
cool.
give her the documents that she needs to fully account for the $60 million that was spent on this boondoggle. These Liberals have in the past used the executive to shield themselves from investigation by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police like they did in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. So this time Canadians want to know who got rich, other than, of course, these two guys working out of their basement who took Liberal bosses out for fine dinners and whiskey tastings. Will these Liberals join our calls to call in the RCMP and investigate this scandal?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and we are very pleased, obviously, to hear the member clearly state that he has full confidence in the ability of the Auditor General to keep doing her job, including supporting the RCMP when that is demanded by the RCMP.
There's other members that are asking questions or making comments. I would ask them to please hold off and allow the honourable member to minister or whoever's answering or asking questions to be uninterrupted. L'honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, is ultimately the Prime Minister is ultimately responsible for Arrive Can, which was supposed to cost $80,000 and ended up costing 750 times more. This is the scandal of the century. The Prime Minister gave $250 million to a company of two people working out of a basement.
Hey, Spawny, what's up? Thank you so much.
It's the
420. That's pretty funny. Thank you so much.
Wasting public funds, according to La Presse.
Amazing.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years, who in this government is finally going to stand up to the Prime Minister and tell him he's not worth the cost or the corruption? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Not only do we have to thank the Auditor General for her work, but we have to read her report carefully. What we're hearing on the other side of the House is unfortunately not helpful and may even be counterproductive. We're doing a serious job. The Auditor General has done a serious job, and we're counting on her to continue to keep up the good work. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The minister's telling the truth. I'm quoting from newspaper articles ever since the Auditor General revealed this scandal. Canadians ended up paying $60 million for an app that was only supposed to cost $80,000. And according to the papers, GC Strategy doesn't do any IT work. They were paid millions of dollars to develop a useless app. And we're talking about $250 million total in contracts. Will the Prime Minister, who's not worth the cost, give us and the RCMP all the documents so that we can shed full light on this matter? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member is quite
Beam
right
me up.
to talk about the costs of protecting the health and safety of Canadians, including in times of a pandemic, which cost a lot of Canadian lives, which cost a lot of jobs, which caused problems with the flow of trade and so on. Despite the fact that this was a major crisis, the AG clearly said it was unacceptable for CBSA to not do its job properly. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, in February of last year, the federal government had promised to increase health transfers.
I really do appreciate
Quebec and the provinces were forced to accept 6 times less than what they needed at the end of a long political struggle. 1 year later, Quebec hasn't received a single penny. There's already a $1 billion shortfall in healthcare funding because Ottawa is holding back the money. Why is Ottawa holding back? Because the federal government wants to set its own conditions, to attach strings to that money. Will the government finally give Quebec the money it promised instead of holding patients hostage? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for the question.
With all our provinces and territories, including Quebec, to make sure that healthcare that is much needed for all Canadians is provided. And that is why we're so proud to invest $200 billion over 10 years to all provinces and territories to support Canadians in getting the best and excellent healthcare. And we'll continue to work with Quebec to ensure that they get the same care. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, that's not the question. Remember, the federal government does not manage a single hospital. They have no expertise in health care. But they're holding back the money needed to care for people because they think they can tell healthcare workers how to do their job.
It does help. Like, I don't understand exactly how it works,
that the almost $5 billion the federal government is holding back is money that belongs to Quebecers. It's their tax money. And all we want is our fair share. Quebecers want their money used for health care, not for liberal political games. So when is the federal government going to pay us our money? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Quebec share the same objective, and that is to provide quality health care guided by Canada Health Act to all Quebecers. Whether it's family health, whether it's mental health, whether it's health care for our seniors, we will continue to work with Government of Quebec closely so that those shared priorities are met and Quebecers, like all Canadians, get the best health care through federal government. Thank you.
Honourable for Nunavut.
Canada's federal housing advocate confirmed this week that Indigenous peoples are more likely to be forced to live on the streets. This government's lack of action means Indigenous peoples are being intentionally forgotten. In Edmonton, 60% of those living on the streets are Indigenous. In Winnipeg, it's 2/3, and in Saskatoon, it's over 90%. In Nunavut, many tell me about overcrowding because of the lack of housing. Will the minister listen to the federal housing advocate and stop underfunding Indigenous housing?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We are taking action to address the tremendous lack of safe, affordable housing and housing supports for Indigenous peoples in urban, rural, and northern communities. The For Indigenous, by Indigenous approach that guides our housing strategy will ensure successful approaches for communities in need. Since 2016, we've supported the construction, renovation, and retrofit of over 30,000 homes in First Nation communities and continue to work with partners to co-develop a 10-year housing and infrastructure strategy. All levels of government must work together to solve this crisis and continue to push for Indigenous-led solutions to address these gaps.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Madam Speaker, it's been 2 weeks since I asked the Health Minister his plan to address the closure of Clinic 554, Fredericton's only healthcare provider offering safe abortions. This government has done nothing. While Conservatives push backdoor legislation violating the right to a safe abortion, the so-called feminist Liberals fail to address access. Why is this government denying access to safe, trauma-informed abortion care?
That's right. The Honourable
Hey, Mitchell, what's up?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm tremendously grateful for the allyship of the member across the way for that very important question. This clinic is located in my riding. It's an issue I've been on for many, many years. The federal government actually has stepped up and supported research projects to support better data collection, to inform our provincial partners who really hold the pen on this issue. We've also held back provincial transfers
Bonnie,
as
what's
well,
up? Did I say
to ensure
hello?
that the Canada Health Act is
I
upheld.
must have, yeah.
More absolutely needs to be done, and reproductive rights must be assured in this country no matter where you live. Thank you.
The honourable member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the Arrive scam app is just
Michael
like
Cooper's
the Prime Minister,
funny.
not worth the cost and not worth the corruption. The Auditor General revealed that an app that didn't work cost taxpayers a staggering $60 million, including $20 million that went to a two-person company that did no work. Now the RCMP have launched a criminal investigation but are being obstructed by these Liberals who are hiding documents. Will the Prime Minister stop the obstruction and turn over the documents today?
L'honorable ministre.
Hey, Tom, what's up?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There have already been a number of answers given to that question this week and even today. The answer is still the same. The Auditor General deserves our acknowledgement. She's done a lot of work, and it's very important, and the report on Monday was troubling. The good news is that a lot of the recommendations she made have already been implemented and have been for some time now, but the work is ongoing because it's very important to ensure that the public service is doing its work properly, even in times of crisis.
Honourable member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, 60 million taxpayers' dollars wasted, fraud, forgery, and corruption. That is a Arrive scam, and these Liberals have tried to cover up this scandal every step of the way. They obstructed parliamentary committees, they attempted to obstruct an investigation by the Auditor General, and now they're obstructing an RCMP criminal investigation. When will these Liberals stop the obstruction and turn over the documents to the RCMP?
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Comme je l'ai dit.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I already said in English, there's no obstruction here. On the contrary, the Auditor General has to have all the documents she needs to do her work, because her work goes to the very heart of the integrity of our democratic and parliamentary system.
Hey, Donna,
and that's
what's
why
up?
She needs
I'm
to have
glad we don't
access
have to listen
all
to
those
Greg
documents.
Fergus, too.
And that,
Like,
because
it's a
she
break
had access
for
to those
everybody.
documents, that's how she was
Right?
able to do her work, and we will share the documents with other partners like the RCMP.
The RCMP needs access to the documents so that people can be held to account for this waste. The NDP Liberal government's waste of at least $60 million
Hey, what's up, True
on the
Blue?
Arrive Scam Act, which wrongly put 10,000 people into mandatory quarantine, was so bad that the RCMP are investigating, and they need access to these documents. After 8 years, Canadians deserve better. They deserve accountability and transparency. Why haven't the Liberals released these documents, and what are they trying to hide?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's upsetting to hear the Conservatives questioning the integrity of the Auditor General. She said very clearly in recent days that not only was she able to work with the RCMP, she said she already was. And we will provide anything the RCMP wishes to have.
To be clear, Madam Speaker, I'm not questioning the integrity of the Auditor General. I'm questioning the integrity of this government that is hiding these documents from the RCMP. Canadians deserve accountability. Somebody needs to be held to account for the waste of $60 million that went to a shady IT company that had 2 people working in a basement. Why haven't the Liberals released these documents? Release them now.
My question about the 2 people in the basement, is there room for a third? Because I could use a job like that.
Government House Leader,
who couldn't? Lord.
if he wishes to
answer,
will stand. But I would just ask him to please wait until it's the appropriate time to do that. The Honourable Minister.
It's better than Greg Fergus.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sure that the member opposite is not also claiming that the RCMP can't do its job properly. The RCMP, like the Auditor General, are arm's length, independent of government. They can do their work without, they are to do their work without any political interference. The Honourable Member for Les Echemins Bellechasse-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are in shock. They paid a minimum of the government paid a minimum of $60 million for ArriveCAN, which was supposed to cost only 80 grand. That's 750 times more. The AG has said this is probably some of the worst financial record-keeping she's ever seen. After 8 years of this worn-out and incompetent government, ArriveCAN is, like the Prime Minister, not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister join with us in asking the RCMP to expand its investigation? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Duclos is like a
things have
zombie.
already been fully explained. And it's worth mentioning again that just a few months ago,
Raised in a seminary
and a few years
or something?
ago, Canada went through the worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis. We had to react quickly and effectively to save the lives of thousands of Canadians and to save huge amounts of economic activity. Unfortunately, this contract broke the rules, and it's unacceptable for public servants to have not followed the rules. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Echemins-Lévis. Had it not been for the Conservatives last fall calling for this investigation, none of this scandal would have been uncovered. Since this government took office 8 years ago, it's been chaos. Nothing works. The Prime Minister is not worth the cost. The app was basically 2 men getting millions of dollars from the basement of a bungalow to develop an app that wasn't supposed to cost more than 80 grand. GC Strategies got a huge share of the contracts, many of them untendered. With the Liberals, it's an open bar. The Conservatives wants the RCMP to expand its investigation. Will the Prime Minister join with us?
What's up?
I'd like to remind the Honourable Member that she has to direct her questions through the Speaker's chair and not directly to the government. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague is quite right. The Auditor General's work is crucial, it's essential, and she needs to have all the documents to do the work properly. She did her work properly, and she tabled her report on Monday. The results are shocking and alarming, and the recommendations have to be taken seriously. In most cases, those recommendations were already implemented weeks ago. The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. The AG's report on ArriveCAN is a Russian doll of scandals. It's unacceptable that an app estimated at 80 grand ended up costing 60 million. It's even more unacceptable that it's impossible to know the true cost because of missing documents. It's even more unacceptable that GC Strategies drafted the call for tenders to make sure they would get the contract. And it's the height of unacceptability that this 2-person company, which does nothing, was awarded 140 other contracts since 2010. When will there be an investigation into each and every one of those other contracts? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And yes, indeed, the lack of documentation is the key finding in the AG's report. The documentation was defective and incomplete. The documents were not filed properly, and that is basically one of the core findings of the report, and that is why we are continuing and will continue to do the cleanup work that needs doing. The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Well, apparently the record keeping has been bad since 2010. Maybe something should have been done about this before then. GC Strategies has been getting contracts since 2015, and under a new president at CBSA, another $12 million was invested in ArriveCAN. There's clearly a culture of zero accountability at the agency, which continues to this day. So is this government going to put the agency under third-party management or not? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague. It's true. The CBSA plays an essential role every day in facilitating the flow of travelers and billions of dollars worth of trade, and that was very important during the pandemic. People needed essential medications. There was essential equipment needed to cross the border, including in the member opposite's riding.
St. Margaret's.
The ArriveCAN map is just like the Prime Minister, not worth the cost and not worth the corruption. The RCMP is investigating this $80,000 app, which cost more than $60 million. But the Auditor General said it will take a court order for the RCMP to get access to all the documents into this Liberal corruption. Will the Prime Minister stop his cover-up, not make the police seek a court order, and hand over all the documents voluntarily to the police and to Parliament so Canadians can learn the truth?
You would hope so.
L'Honorable Ministre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member is correct when he points to the ability, the expertise of the RCMP and the Auditor General and other institutions to work together. They know how to do their job. They don't need political processes politicians use to do their jobs. The RCMP and the Auditor General and all of the other independent organizations on which Canadians have the fortune to depend know what to do.
The honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
The institution that's covering up is this Liberal cabinet and that Liberal minister. If the Prime Minister has nothing to hide, why does the RCMP need a court order? Release the documents voluntarily. A government with nothing to hide would produce these documents for the police without a court order. The ArriveCAN app is not worth the cost, and the Prime Minister is not worth the corruption. Will the Prime Minister end this cover-up, release all the ArriveCAN documents voluntarily, stop the cover-up, turn it over to the police and Parliament so Canadians can get the truth?
L'Honorable Ministre.
I find Perkins pretty entertaining. What about you? What do you think?
The member points to the work of the Auditor General. She has already said in public that she is not only able but very willing to work with the RCMP and any other institution in the government that would like to use her important findings on Monday. Now, the member may want to speak to the Auditor General to understand how she does that. That's for him to decide. But we, on this side of the House, have full confidence in the ability of the Auditor General.
Keep those hands away from me, bud.
Madam Speaker, the revelations in the Auditor General's report on the ArriveCAN app are shocking. And after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, waste is at an all-time high. Canadians know that just like the ArriveCAN app, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost and he's not worth the corruption. Unfortunately, the Auditor General was only able to scratch the surface of this costly corruption. Evidence is being withheld and maybe even destroyed. It's time to send in the police. When will the Prime Minister stop the cover-up and call for a complete investigation into the ArriveCAN fiasco?
Hey, Serena. How are you?
L'Honorable Ministre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, I think no one in this House should attempt to display a lack of confidence in the ability of the Auditor General to do her job. I'm sure we're all united in supporting the importance and the value of what she does. She needs no advice on the part of politicians. She has full expertise. Now, if they want to provide her with their particular advice, they know how to reach out to her. Otherwise, we can help them connect to her.
Remind the honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's that he had an opportunity to ask questions. If he has other questions to ask, he should wait till the appropriate time and not interrupt the minister. The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Interesting.
Well, Madam Speaker, these Liberals keep making excuses, but extraordinary circumstances are no excuse for extraordinary corruption. After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians know that the Arrive Scam app, just like the Prime Minister, is not worth the cost or the corruption. Now, if the Liberals had had their way, the Auditor General wouldn't have even investigated this issue at all. And it's now clear to Canadians that these Liberals had at least 60 million reasons to stop this investigation. Now, when will this NDP Liberal government join us and call for a complete investigation so that Canadians can get the truth?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the member is totally right to pointing to how important the work she does is every day. She and her office are fundamental to the operations of our democracy. They are there to help and sometimes to challenge the government in doing the right thing. That's why we're so grateful for her report on Monday. We have already said that we have taken into account all the recommendations that she has provided, and many of them have already been in place, in fact, for a few weeks now.
The honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, Canadian seniors on fixed incomes are struggling very much to afford groceries in a difficult time. The government says it's talking tough with big grocers like Loblaws, but what has that led to? Loblaws trying to cut a sweetheart deal with Manulife to screw seniors. Loblaws getting in the way of the grocery code of conduct. Loblaws getting rid of their discount on near expired foods only to replace it later after public outcry. The only thing the government's done is given Loblaws a slap on the wrist and $12 million for new fridges. So when is it going to get actually serious about doing something to lower grocery prices in Canada?
Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah.
Labor and Seniors.
Speaker, we've been there for seniors from the get-go. One of the first things that we did was reverse what the former Prime Minister did, Stephen Harper did, on the world stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And he raised that retirement age from 65 to 67, putting a lot of seniors into poverty. We've increased the GIS. We've increased the OAS. We've enhanced the CPP. Meanwhile, we don't know where the Conservatives stand on the CPP. The leader of the official opposition thinks that he could do better than the CPP board. It's just a shame.
He's a twitchy little guy, that one. Sheen is always moving very quickly.
Madam Speaker, this government has given 32 different
Matt Green's
contracts
going to be pissed
totaling
off.
$60 million to the same consultants, GC Strategies for the useless Arrive Can app. Liberals simply can't help themselves from helping themselves, while Canadians can barely pay the bills. And at a time when we should be investing in the skills and knowledge of our public service, Liberals would rather hand over millions to private consultants. So why is this Liberal government giving money to their rich friends instead of investing in the valuable work of our federal public service?
Hey, Lisa. Hey, Angus. How are you guys doing?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the member points to the valuable public service, and he is entirely right. They work extremely hard during the pandemic to protect the health and safety of millions of Canadians and millions of jobs. This being said, this is not an excuse for a very few of them in the CBSA not to have done their job appropriately. The Auditor General was very clear as to why that wasn't done on Monday. We have obviously took into account, we have watched her recommendations. We have implemented many of them and will implement the others to come.
The honourable for Etobicoke Centre.
Madam Speaker, Canada and the United States have one of the most
Baker's
close
a
and
nut.
important relationships of any two nations in the world. And there are millions of Canadians and countless constituents of mine who work at businesses who rely on trade with the United States. And let's be frank, the economy and quality of life of every single Canadian and every single one of my constituents in Etobicoke Centre depends on a strong economic and trading relationship between Canada and the U.S. So could the Minister of International Trade share with Canadians what our Team Canada engagement strategy, how it will defend Canada's interest in and with the United States?
Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Madam Speaker, when President Biden addressed this chamber, he said that Canada and the United States can do big things. If we work together, if we stand together, we will rise together. Right. That is the approach that the Minister of Innovation and I are approaching with Team Canada and our U.S. re-engagement strategy. And I'm looking forward to working with the member from Etobicoke Centre and counting on his expertise. The trade between Canada and the United States is really impactful to our economy, and I know that this work will continue.
Mary Ing is a problem, guys.
Just
just
The
saying.
Environment Minister has left the highway of common sense and taken the off-ramp off to Fantasy Island. He'll say yes to spending $400 million to promote skateboarding to fight climate change, but no to a bridge that has cut the village of Bolsover in half for 3 long years. And in Parks Canada's own words, the bridge is of national historic significance. Creating a longer commute will not save the environment. So when will the minister realize that roads won't pave themselves and fund the bridge in Bolsover?
Good afternoon, Ungabunga. How are you?
Yesterday, Madam Speaker, I made the comment that the honourable colleague takes a nonpartisan approach to issues, and he does. And that's why I'm surprised that he continues to maintain this approach today when he knows very well that this government has invested in over 8,500 bridge, road, or highway projects across the country. And we are proud that that's happened. It needs to continue. Which of the almost 4,000, this is directly to him, which of the almost 4,000 projects in Ontario is he against? We'll continue to fund these projects.
So the honourable member,
find
the
he's
minister knows that
arrogant.
our
Like he
parliamentary
talks
secretary
down
knows
to
that he's not to
Canadians
address
every
it
time.
directly to them, but through me. The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Well, Speaker, I appreciate the comments from the member opposite. I don't think telling the residents of Bolsover that they shouldn't believe their lying eyes. The bridge has been out for 3 long years. It was built in 1902. It's 42 meters long. It's of national historic significance, owned by Parks Canada. The minister announced that no more roads and bridges will be funded by the federal government. And suddenly, Parks Canada announces that the bridge will not be funded. So if the member opposite wants to prove me wrong, and I really hope he does, will the minister commit today to funding the Boundary Road swing bridge in Bolsover, yes or no?
Hey, Rapid Dog, what's up?
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Speaker, I regularly participate in question period. This is the first time I've heard the member raise this particular issue. And I'm sincere when I say that I'm happy to talk with him after question period to learn more about his particular concern. But I maintain, and through you, of course, Madam Chair, which of the almost 4,000 road, bridge, or highway projects that have been funded just in the province of Ontario alone, where he's from, is he against, Madam Speaker? They want to starve communities of infrastructure funds. We will not allow that. We'll continue to help communities. Thank you very much.
Order. The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Madam Speaker, the Takla First Nation is a rural and remote community in northern BC. They've been asking this government for a safe and sustainable road into their community for 8 years. The existing road is often impassable, leaving Takla without access to critical emergency services like fire and ambulance. Were the 2 ministers of Indigenous Affairs aware that the radical Minister of Environment and their government were no longer funding critical road infrastructure in Canada, or did they find out through Monday morning media like the Takla First Nation?
Just want to remind the honourable member that he's not to name members. Sorry. The honourable member used a specific language. It's not really acceptable in the House. Sorry.
It's radical that they're not funding road infrastructure anymore.
Yes, I would ask members to restructure their sentence that it's more acceptable. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
It's better than Greg Fergus.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much.
All I can say is that beats Greg Fergus for sure. I like Chris Dauchma. He's my favorite.
Road, bridge, and infrastructure projects in British Columbia, where that member is from. How many did he vote for? 0, Madam Speaker. 0. Where is his support for his constituents in his province? I know he's a sincere member. I've heard him speak in the House many times. And so I'm not sure what's happened, if he's been whipped to not support particular the projects that I mentioned here for his province. It's a shame. We'll continue to work with municipalities, towns, and cities to ensure that they have the infrastructure dollars, including for road, bridge, and highway.
What happened there? That wasn't me. That wasn't me. That was the feed.
Madam Speaker, this Prime Minister is waging a war on cars. He said that the government has decided not to invest in new road infrastructure. Can you believe that? The radical environment minister did not clarify what he said, and he in fact took things further, saying that the government would block major projects. The people in my riding would be very happy to benefit from the third link. Why is the government against workers in my community and in my region who are just trying to get to work?
To the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Soft
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
sarcasm.
And the
Good
honourable
afternoon.
member
How are
talks
you?
about a war on cars. I want to talk about something that the government is taking seriously and is doing for Canadians when it comes to cars that are being stolen in their communities, an issue in my riding. Last week, I attended the summit to combat auto theft, and at that summit came together stakeholders like police, industry, insurance, CBSA, ports, and all levels of government, and all of them agreed that the way to solve this issue is through coordination and cooperation, not through slogans. Madam Speaker, we're taking this issue seriously and we're taking action. Thank you.
Again, I want to remind members when someone has the floor to please not interrupt them. I've heard lots of comments, and I would just or
They were all
answers
telling
that they
Pam
wanted to throw
Damoff to
there,
retire.
but I would just ask members to please wait until it's their appropriate time. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Repentigny. No to the Chalk River nuclear dump. The federal government cannot support burying nuclear waste on the banks of the Ottawa River. That is the drinking water source for millions of Quebecers. The Nuclear Safety Commission did not listen to Quebecers. The Montreal metropolitan community and its 82 cities are against this. Gatineau is against this. Together, these two entities represent 4.5 million people. That's half the population of Quebec. So, since Chalk River does not have social acceptability, will the minister reverse this decision?
L'honorable.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the important question. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission is independent, and they do not approve projects if they are not 100% certain that those projects are safe. They will protect Canadians, they will protect the environment, there will be consultations, and they are independent. That's important. The government does not make decisions for the Nuclear Safety Commission. The politicians should not be making decisions for the Nuclear Safety Commission. They are an independent expert commission. They decide what is safe and what should be approved, and we respect them. There will be a judicial review, and we look forward to the results of that review. The honourable member for Repentigny. Well, let's talk about the Commission and its approval of Chalk River. During the Commission's consultations, they neglected to mention the opposition of 4.5 million Quebecers and of Indigenous groups. They also forgot to mention that one of the commissioners who authorized the project is a former Chalk River employee, believe that. As for the federal government, the government forgot to mention that it appoints the commissioners and is thus responsible for this flawed approval
Trevor,
process.
what's up?
The federal government is putting Quebecers' drinking water at risk with this nuclear dump. Will Ottawa stop hiding and say no to Chalk River? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Energy and Natural Resources. Madam Speaker, I disagree with this question from my Bloc Québécois colleague. The Commission is independent. It is made up of experts who study these decisions. Canadians want to know that there are experts reviewing these decisions, leading consultations. Canadians are clear that they don't want politicians making these decisions, so the government is not involved in this decision. We have an independent commission of experts who have led consultations, who will continue to consult, and who will ensure that this site is safe.
Confederation.
Madam Speaker, the Oxford Dictionary defines a fool as a person who acts unwisely or imprudently. It is ironic that this Prime Minister chose April Fool's Day to increase his carbon tax by a whopping 23%, increasing the misery that many Canadian families face. This tax is not a joke, Madam Speaker. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, and now his plan to quadruple the carbon tax, he's just not worth the cost. Will this NDP Liberal government cancel their April foolish carbon tax increase?
It's going to be bad in April, guys. Like, by the end of May, everybody's going to be a lot more poor.
Conservatives who deny that climate change exists and who want to take money away from Canadians, what we are doing with the rebate is putting money back in their pockets.
It hurts.
That's $1,100 to Ontario families, $1,800 to Alberta families, $1,200 for Manitoba families, and the list goes on, Mr. Speaker. And I'd just like to ask the opposition, does it make common sense to deny climate change and to cut benefits for Canadian families, including the carbon rebate?
Hear, hear.
Before I go to the next question, I just want to remind the member that he's not to ask something indirectly, say something indirectly. Yes, I mean that the previous question was bordered on indirectly what he could say, can't say directly. So I just want to caution him on that. The honourable member for
She wants to
Calgary,
watch out. She's getting into Greg
That's
Fergus
just, bloody
territory.
foolish, Madam
Like,
Speaker. She just doesn't
sit down and shut up. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
Okay. Okay, as long perfect. Okay, on the minister's response. Okay, the honourable member for Calgary Confederation.
On the minister's response, that was just bloody foolish, Madam Speaker. She doesn't understand that if you tax the farmer that grows the food and you tax the trucker who ships the food, then you tax the people who buy the food. Already, a typical family of four will have to pay $700 more in groceries in 2024 compared to last year. And the carbon tax makes up a quarter of their home heating bills. This NDP Liberal government isn't fooling anyone anymore with their April Fool's Day tax hike. Can't we all agree that now is not the time for higher taxes? Axe the bloody tax.
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister for Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And
This clown.
I would like to remind...
Order. I'm sure that the honourable members want to hear the answer. The Honourable Minister.
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I would like to remind the colleague opposite that in the Ag Committee last week, one of Canada's foremost expert on food policy, Sylvain Charlebois from Dalhousie University, said, and I quote, Madam Speaker, we don't see the evidence of that, talking about the impact of carbon pricing on food in Canada. And actually, they invited him to speak at the Ag Committees, Madam Speaker, so I think we have it here. The Bank of Canada has said that pricing pollution is not having a material impact on inflation in Canada. It's less than half of 1%. We know that...
The honourable member
Does
for
that make
Cypress
any
Hills
sense to you?
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister blew over $60 million taxpayer dollars for his Arrive scam app in a corruption scandal that's looking worse day by day. This NDP Liberal government is also going to force grocery, gas and home heating prices to go up on April 1st as they increase the carbon tax another 23%. After 8 years of being scammed and robbed by this Prime Minister, Canadians know that he's not worth the cost or the corruption. So why won't he just admit that his income redistribution scam is toast and just axe the tax?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Madam Speaker, the hypocrisy of the Conservatives is just off the charts. Conservatives use the hardship of people that are in food bank lineups for political gain, but when it comes to actually helping Canadians, they're nowhere to be found. They adamantly oppose every real solution we put forward. They've said no to a grocery rebate. They are delaying competition reforms. They've voted against a framework for implementing a national school food program. It's appalling. And just a couple of weeks ago, we learned that their top advisor to the leader of the opposition, Jenny Byrne, is a lobbyist for Loblaws. Well, Canadians can tell whose corner they're in, and it's...
And that's why siblings shouldn't have children.
Madam Speaker,
Ryan Turnbull.
we are proud of Quebec's
happens.
businesses. They create jobs and they support economic growth. The member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord mentioned during a parliamentary committee meeting that there is sometimes a lack of financing and funding for businesses, but the Conservatives voted against funding for businesses. Can the minister responsible for the Economic Development Agency of Canada and the regions of Quebec tell us how our government's programs support the growth and resilience of the supply chains of Quebec's companies? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Indeed, the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec has existed for 50 years.
I don't know what to say, Dive Crew Canada.
In that time, it has supported
thank you so
billions of dollars worth of support for businesses
it's greatly appreciated.
in Quebec.
I can't make
On
it.
the one hand,
I can't
members of the
express it
Conservative
anymore.
Party, Quebecers,
really
say
do
that they want to
appreciate
support
that.
businesses,
It's
but
going
then
to
they
help
vote
a lot.
against funding.
I can see it has already.
Against
So
the
thank you.
agency's funding for programs. They voted
amazing.
against, for example, the Regional Economic Growth Fund. I will continue to work with the member for Lac Saint-Louis to support all of Quebec's regions and all of Quebec's businesses. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal government is going to raise the tax on beer, wine, and spirits again on April 1st for the 8th year in a row. Wow. Most Canadians can barely afford to eat, heat, and house themselves, and we know that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, but our brewers, vintners, and distillers know that this government is harming their industries.
Yes, they are.
For once, will they cancel this year's undemocratic automatic tax increase and bring back happy hour for Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
What we will ensure, Madam Speaker, is a continued competitive environment for brewers and vintners, and that environment is one that allows for people to go out and buy their beer or buy their wine or whatever they wish to do with their free time. In this country, we want to ensure continued success. And what do we see? A very low unemployment rate, lower than what was the case before the pandemic, a better GDP rate as compared to before the pandemic. They want to cut EI, they want to cut CP, they want to cut the dental benefit, the child care benefit, all of it, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
The Parliamentary Secretary wants to help Canadians and help industry by raising their taxes 8 years in a row. On Canada's taxes on beer, wine, and spirits are already among the highest in the entire world. Brewers spend more than twice as much on production tax than they do on wages for their well-paid unionized workers, proving that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost to Canadian jobs. If this NDP Liberal government can't give happy hour back to Canadian consumers, will they at least axe the automatic tax increase on industry, exporters, small businesses, unionized production workers, retailers, and restaurant servers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
As I said, Madam Speaker, we will continue to do everything we can to ensure a competitive environment for brewers, for the vintner sector, and for all Canadian businesses. But it's interesting, the member talks about unions. That's what stood out in his question. The Conservative Party is the party of unions all of a sudden? I couldn't think of anything less true. Throughout their tenure in office from 2006 to 2015, they did everything they could to make sure that unions had no power, no role in this country's decision-making. We've engaged in unions, we've engaged with labor, we'll continue to do exactly that.
Hey, Danny, what's up, Bertie? How are you guys doing?
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. On April 1st, he will once again be raising his carbon tax by 23% on gas, groceries, and home heating. Also on April 1st, he will be raising his excise tax on beer, wine, and spirits by another 4.7%. When will this Prime Minister stop his cruel April Fool's Day jokes and give Canadians a break?
It won't be very funny on April Fool's this year.
The Honourable Minister.
Actually quite interested in the member opposite's question, because what he's effectively saying is that he is not in favor of the members and his people in his province receiving $1,500 in the carbon rebate that our government, is putting back in the pockets of Canadians. So $1,500, Madam Speaker, and that's along with rebates across our country, $1,100 in Ontario, $1,200 in Manitoba. The contrast is clear.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
Madam Speaker, this April, residents of Kitchener South Hespeler will be receiving their first quarterly installment of the Canada Carbon Rebate. Can the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada share with this House how these rebates are reducing emissions while making life more affordable for Canadians in provinces where the federal backstop system applies?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
The Canada Carbon Rebate is increasing, and Ontario family of four will receive $280 per family of four per quarterly payments throughout the year. What we're doing, Madam Speaker, is we're making big polluters pay more for their pollution. What the Conservative Party wants to do is make pollution free for those big polluters. Like oil companies, we're making record level profits. Not on this side of the House, Madam Speaker. We will work to continue fighting climate change, supporting Canadian through the Canada Carbon Rebate, and help fight climate change.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
A 75-year-old Palestinian Canadian is stuck in Gaza, and he is in poor health and he needs medical care. He went to Rafah, and no Canadian ambassadors were there to help him leave. His son, my constituent, told me that his father has been used as a human shield by the Israeli military to force Gazans out of their homes. He is worried sick. This government has had 4 months to secure the safe passage of Canadians out of Gaza. Other countries have done it, so why can't this government ensure the safe return of Canadians and their families from Gaza?
Hi, Dan H. Hi, Eileen. How are you guys?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her advocacy. I know that she reached out to the minister about this case yesterday, as have other MPs reached out to me personally about this case. We are in constant contact with our consular officials in the region. We're also in contact with the relevant countries, with COGAT, which is the body that is in charge of whether or not people can leave. We're deeply troubled when we hear stories of these Canadians who are unable to leave Gaza, and we will continue our advocacy, and we will not stop until we get all Canadians home. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
She just needs to retire. Who thinks?
Madam Speaker, in Toronto, auto thefts have increased by 25.4%, and $500 million worth of cars were stolen last year. Because this government was asleep at the wheel, our cities are not only less safe, experts are projecting car insurance premiums could be going up by as much as 25%. On average, that's an extra $600 a year that people cannot afford. Madam Speaker, auto theft summits make for good photo ops, so what people need is action. The government must put up serious roadblocks to combat thefts. Will the government finally give police and the CBSA the tools, funding, and personnel they desperately need to keep us safe?
This is probably going to be the last answer or the last avoidance of an answer.
It's unfortunate the honourable member calls the summit that was held last week a photo op. I and my colleagues were there and actually heard from stakeholders. We heard from insurance companies, and I spoke to one of the chiefs of police who said, not only is this important, but we need to do this more often and formalize these kind of dialogues.
He's just
because
a
the only way
dum-dum.
that we will solve the
Like,
problem of auto theft
really?
is by working together, by
Hey,
working
Ken,
with
what's up?
insurance companies, by working with border services, and making the kind of investments like $120 million to Ontario through the initiative to take action against guns and violence, which the minister just introduced recently, and $28 million to support the work of CPSA.
And that brings us to the end of question period. Have a good weekend, those of you who are having to exit.
So that's going to wrap up the week for question periods. So I just had a message there from Ken saying that people aren't being notified about the events. Pretty much the way it goes is Mondays to Thursdays, I'm on here at, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, like 3 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. And on Fridays, it's a couple hours early. On Fridays, just question period is early. They start at noon. So that's the schedule. And the rest of the videos are kind of hit and miss. It's so much fun. This Dive Crew Canada, you blew me away today. Like, that's the most generous thing that I've ever seen on here ever. And it's going to help. I assure you, it won't be misplaced. I'll be working hard at trying to improve and keeping up with the content and just doing the best that we can. Because Canadians do need to see this stuff. Like, if you don't know, you don't know. And once you start seeing it, you're like, hey, that person is being deceptive to me. Like, and people catch on, and then there'll be an election, and maybe we can find a new direction. Anyhow, thank God it's Friday, guys. And it was a really entertaining week. The WTF moment, that was a lot of fun. I'm sure that it's only going to get hotter between now and April 1st, which is going to be brutal when that happens. Like, who's going to be able to afford anything? Anything. Like and subscribe. I'm Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. We have a blast here. This chat is so much fun. I really do enjoy doing this stuff. Like, it's part of my routine that I'm like, oh, well, I can't wait to see everybody, to say hello and see what's up, see how everybody's doing, and watch some crazy old Canadian politics. That's it. We're going to get going. Try to stay warm. Have something healthy to eat today, and we'll be catching you in the next videos, or in the next video. We've got more stuff coming this evening, so check it out. We've got a couple of good things, I think, that are going to be pretty fun to watch. Anyhow, Catch you next video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Fridays are great.